Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Beyond Motherhood. I am very fortunate to have another guest on this week's episode. I've got Emma Hopper, and I keep going to say Hooper, and I'm like, no, it's Hopper, it's Hopper. I typed it in one thing, and now, it's in my mind now, but it's Emma Hopper. And Emma is over in New Zealand, and she is a trauma-informed parent coach. And we're going to be chatting about embodied parenting today, which I'm really excited to dive into. So welcome, Emma. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. An absolute pleasure.
Excellent. So I guess we'll just dive straight in. I'd love for you to share a bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and what were some of the things that led you into the work that you're doing with parents.
Yeah, amazing. So as you say, my name is Emma Hopper. I always get the Hooper, so please don't even feel bad. Don't worry about it. It happens all the time. I well, I guess starting off, I'm Irish. I moved to New Zealand 12 years ago, and that is where I became a mom. And I now have two lovely little ones. They're 5 and 7. My youngest is my girl. She is my extremely spicy child, and she is what I was as a child. And so I find myself just like left, right, and center being triggered by her behavior. And then my boy is the older, he's 7-year-old, and he is just so easy breezy. And so having the two polar opposites is really interesting to witness in parenting. Um, how I got into supporting parents in this field, it actually stems from my own upbringing and my experience with motherhood, if I'm to be honest. I was raised, and I think a lot of people my age were very similar. I was raised in a home that was very fear-based and on the premise of be seen and not heard. Like my dad didn't want to know we were there, and my mom tried to keep us as quiet as possible so it didn't irritate my dad. Um, and I guess, like as a child, it's really interesting to reflect back on it because we weren't allowed to have big emotions or display big emotions. We were told you'll be fine, it's okay, quieten down. And it wasn't until I got into this journey that reflecting back, I really recognized how I never truly respected my father for his parenting. Prior to that, I would have said, like, yeah, he was a great dad, but actually, I never respected his authority because it wasn't that. It was forced, a forced respect that we needed to give. But then, fast forward to my own motherhood journey, when I became a mom, oh my gosh, there's that like absolute joy, isn't there? There's the holding your baby for the first time, and with my boy, I instantly connected. But just for transparency, with my girl, I never did, not until she was about 2 years old. But with my boy, yeah, I just everything felt perfect. It was incredible, and I just felt this overwhelming love for him. But I also experienced postnatal rage or postpartum rage, and it was only on becoming a mom that I experienced this level of anger. I never in my entire life had experienced anger. I was always deemed the happy girl, like the fun-loving person, outgoing. But I didn't know what to do with this anger that I was experiencing for the first time in 30 years of my life.
Mm.
So I went down a lot of shame and guilt spirals. I would beat myself up and ruminate at the end of the night on how hard the day went and just regretting choices that I had made. And that continued on for about 2 years. And within that space, then I fell pregnant with my girl and had her. And when I had her, my daughter, I'm very grateful for my daughter. I'm grateful for both children, but I'm extremely grateful for my daughter because she really didn't tolerate any of my BS. And a lot of parents will go, oh, the spicy child, but actually my spicy child really held up a mirror and basically said, you need to stop this nonsense. And it was in having her that I realized how much I had to deal with.
Mm,
That the my inward journey had already begun, but when my daughter got here, yeah, I had no choice but to change what I was doing and to really go inward on a really very deep level and gain the support, through other coaches and mentors to do the deeper work.
mm,
And from then on, I have never looked back. And
mm,
so I've gone from this extremely reactive, rage-filled parent who blamed everyone else. Like my partner didn't see me, my kids did this, they didn't listen, they made me angry. I'm feeling very disconnected and conflicted in how I was showing up to now truly, absolutely loving being a mother.
mm,
And like I wake up with excitement to parent and to see my kids. And that's why I got into this space. I want other parents to feel that joy that parenting can bring.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think, maybe we'll put a pin in that, and maybe if we get time to come back to it around
Mm,
rage in motherhood, because it's definitely something I've experienced even in recent times. And I think it's something that we
mm,
don't speak about enough, because I guess it's something that fills us with so much shame and guilt. And, there's that fear of speaking openly about it because we're fear of what others will think of us and the judgment that comes with that. But sadly, there's most likely so many mums suffering in silence because of it, because
oh,
they feel like they can't speak out about what's
yeah.
what's happening. And similar to you, like I'm not this angry person, but then we get so triggered. So yes, I want to come back to that if we get time. So I
Yeah.
think it's a great thing to chat about, and really an important topic. We could probably do another episode on it.
I would love to.
yeah. But I would love to, because when we connected and I was looking through your Instagram and speaking to you, and the term embodied parent is something that you use, and it's something that I haven't come across. Many of us have heard the phrase gentle parenting, conscious parenting. So I would love you to just explain what embodied parenting is, if it's the same or if it's similar or what the differences are, would be amazing.
Amazing. Thinking about this, when we spoke prior to this call, or this recording, I was really thinking, how can I simplify it down or, without going on a tangent? And I guess for me, embodied parenting is trauma-informed conscious parenting.
Yeah.
It's probably the simplest way of explaining it. So for me, embodied parenting is having that deep self-awareness. It's being tuned into your bodily sensations, understanding your triggers, and taking embodied proactive approach to that. So you're really working on widening your window of tolerance. You are studying embodiment, right? At the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know about the nervous system,
Yeah, yeah,
I
I know a
imagine.
lot about nervous system.
Okay. Yeah. Oh,
Speaking
you're
about it,
quite,
yep.
yeah, you're quite well versed on nervous system, pardon me. Yeah, so yeah, widening that window of tolerance in a really proactive way so that you're essentially not waiting for things to hit the fan, to take an approach to it.
Mm,
You're really modeling the behaviors that you want to see your children uptake, because as we know now, kids are very monkey see, monkey do. So it's not what you tell them to do, but it's what you do day in, day out that they pick up on and they really start to embody in themselves. So
yeah,
it's really being aware of how you're showing up, and, things like holding yourself to the same expectations that you hold your children to.
yeah,
And that's something I see many parents, including myself, that was definitely one of my pitfalls, was expecting them to do one thing, but then doing something different.
yeah.
And then we'd have this little tug of war battle or back and forth, or this power struggle of like, why won't you listen to me?
Mm,
But our kids don't listen. They observe 24/7. They are observing everything you're doing. Yeah, and I guess as well as the conscious parenting, it's through connection, it's through conscious choice that you're parenting, you're holding firm boundaries, but it's very respectful, and you're really trying to nurture your child's individuality in all of this. You're guiding them to become their own person and growing with them. Um, yeah, it's all about that embodiment, like dropping into your body and using your biology as something that can be empowering rather than being on autopilot and, just being subject to it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Um, it's so funny what you say about monkey see, monkey do. My eldest calls me out a lot, which I love, but also it's quite confronting when it happens. He's like,
Yeah.
"You're on your phone too much," and I'm like, I'm an adult. And then I'm like, oh no, I'm the adult, and I go into that sort of defense mode. And then I'm like, whoa, hang on.
Mm,
Okay, you're right. Like, thank you. Like it's quite funny. Well, it is funny, but
it
it can
is.
be triggering because it's like, whoa, when I actually step back and think about it, he's right. Like, of course,
Mm.
they're trying to get my attention, and I'm like, oh, I've just got to quickly write an email or just post this or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, I'm not actually being present with you right now. So, yeah,
And
it's
our
amazing
kids
what
have
they
this,
observe. As you said, they observe and they're just holding up that mirror. Hey.
yeah. I'm like, can you put it down for a second, please? Yeah, just what you said there about our children, they're so present. They have this beautiful innate way of drawing us back into the present. And I feel like that's why parents struggle, because we have been raised to not be present. We've been raised to constantly look forward, to plan, to prep, to be on time. And we're really in a survival state. We're in this fight, flight, or this shutdown state. So we're not present.
Yeah.
And seeing our children so deeply in the present moment that we can't interrupt them or get them to come with our plans at the blink of an eye, it's highly triggering.
Mm,
And this is like one of those things. I've had clients say, well, I've called across the room to them and they just didn't listen. But they're so deeply invested in the activity that they're doing, it's hard for them to pull away from that present moment. And
yeah.
so I feel like our children have so much to give us in learning how to be present, how to be mindful, how to, like even they're so full of self-love and self-worth. We could really learn so much from our children if we just slow down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. We are just in this hustle and grind mentality in the society that we live in. It's very, and this is obviously going off on a bit of a tangent, but it's that very high
mm,
masculine type energy that we sort of live in. And we've been, many of us, conditioned, and just the way society works now, that to slow down can be so hard for us, and to be in the present moment can be
mhm,
really challenging because our brains just running at a million miles an hour thinking of the to-do lists and planning
mm.
and what else do I need to get done and on all those things. So I love that you mentioned that our children are such, they're such great teachers, and my kids have been
Yeah.
my biggest teachers. I used to call myself, I'm such a patient person. And then I had kids, I'm like, oh, am I? Maybe not so much. Or maybe it's just I haven't been having this mirror held up in front of me to actually realize that, maybe I'm not as patient as I once thought.
Mm. Well, just to add to that, it's not just that we're not this, but they're also showing us where we hold our wounds, right? They're showing us where we weren't allowed to be X, Y, or Z. And that's hard. That's very hard to see.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. It is. It's confronting. But
Mm.
we can learn so much, and that's how we grow. And like you said before, we're growing with our children.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, my eldest is 10 next week, and to think how I used to parent, and I've still got so much to learn because we're all growing, we're all evolving. And there's different seasons of life and motherhood. But to think sort of how I first started as a parent to, 10 years on, and then obviously having another child nearly 4 years ago as well, and the
Mm.
dynamics and how that's changed everything. Like yeah, it's such an incredible journey. It's so challenging, but
Yeah.
so worthwhile. And yeah, I'm so grateful for my kids for holding up that mirror and allowing me to really dive deep into my wounds and start to heal those parts of myself, because I wouldn't have otherwise. I can guarantee I probably wouldn't have. Maybe they would show up in different ways,
Mm.
but yeah, we don't know these things until we have kids.
No, and I love that you say that because just for example, and it's such a strange thing to say, but I thought I had my first when I was 30. For 30 years, I never knew I experienced anxiety.
Mm,
Never. Until my coping mechanisms and strategies were taken away from me. I used to use food or alcohol to suppress or to control. I used to just up and leave. I would literally run away. And when I had my boy and I was forced to be in that space without these coping mechanisms, that's when my anxiety really came through. And it wasn't until then that I stopped and I was like, whoa, what is happening? And yeah, and it's just fascinating because for 30 years, and I say 30 years because I developed poor eating habits or well, a disorder since the age of 4 as a way of controlling because my home environment was so toxic.
mm,
And so I know from the age of 4 onwards, yeah, I definitely would have been experiencing fight, flight, or shutdown response within my system. And it's just fascinating to me to have gone my entire life unaware that this is something I was experiencing until I had my children.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
definitely. Yeah. So, in terms of embodied parenting, like for you, what were, or even just as a whole with parents that you work with, like how does embodied parenting really start to contribute to fostering better relationships with your kids and just as a family unit as well?
Mm. I love that. Yes. I feel one of the biggest things is that as an embodied parent, you really take ownership and radical responsibility for your own emotional state or well-being. So there is no victim mentality and blaming. Your emotional reactions are yours and yours alone. And you understand that nobody can make you feel something you don't choose. So my children can call me all the names under the sun. They can throw tantrums. They can, go against everything I say. But if I don't choose to feel angry or frustrated about that or sad about that, then I can come at it from a neutral place. I can understand that their behavior is a manifestation of what they're feeling inside.
Yeah.
I can choose to come at it from a neutral place rather than creating stories or being a victim to it. And so when you take responsibility, there's no blame there. There's no competition over who has it worse. So you can really show up for them in a way that fosters a deep connection. You get to see them fully, you get to hear them fully. And as I say, I'm in no ways permissive. I hold my boundaries, but equally, I'm not shutting things down or blaming or shaming them for behaviors that they don't have the skills to express in any other way.
Mm, yeah.
I just find that so beautiful.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I know for me, there's, when no one's perfect, but I
Mhm.
really am so aware now when I start to, you know, blame my kids or blame something else instead of taking that responsibility. And, and that's something I try and teach my kids too. Like, you're responsible for your actions and how you react or respond to an event or to someone. But then, there's times where I'm like, when my kids do something, for example, my youngest is in a phase at the moment where he loves to throw things.
Mm.
And really starting to be like, oh, you're making me so angry. Like, and I just catch myself and I'm like, ah, I've done it again. So yes, I've got
Yeah.
such an awareness of it now when I say those sorts of phrases, and I have to catch myself and then try and reword it. And yeah, it's so interesting once you start to do the work, how
Hmm.
quickly you can usually catch yourself when those things come up.
And isn't it beautiful now because you can't unsee it,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
right.
As you,
You're like, ah,
yeah,
no.
as you say, as soon as you hear those words come out, there's like that stop, there's that pause, and then there's the redo.
Yeah,
There's like, hey, not how I wanted to show up. And whether this is said internally or to the other person, your child or partner, where you're saying, hey, that's not how I wanted to show up. Can we redo that? Can we start over? And like, how beautiful is that modeling for your children? Like I personally don't remember any situation in my childhood where my parent apologized,
yeah, 100%.
right? And so like imagine how it must feel when your parent does blame you or blow up. Like I have several times, like I've lost count of how many times I've had these moments where I start to derail or I have completely derailed. And for me to then stop and take radical responsibility for that and apologize to my child, like I see my children soften, like their whole body relaxes when they get that apology.
Yeah.
And now I see them doing the same thing, and I'm just like, oh, it's
Yeah,
working.
yeah. When you feel like anything I'm doing actually working, and then something happens, you're like, yeah,
Yeah,
yes, it's sinking in.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's been a huge piece for me, the repair after rupture, and
Mm,
something that I'd never heard of until my eldest was probably like maybe 5, so like 5 years ago, and when
mm,
I started to dive into this work, um, and obviously we don't want to just be like, oh well, it's okay, I can just repair. Like obviously that's not the goal, to just blow up at your kids all the time, but knowing that we can still have those conversations, and like you said, it teaches our kids that it's okay to be human, we all make mistakes, and
mm,
we can reconnect. And I like to use reset, like you use redo, but it's sort of the same. I'm like, let's reset, like let's try again. And yeah, and because the other day it was I can't remember, it was a few days ago, we were going somewhere and I think we just had a moment and we got in the car. I was like, okay everyone, let's reset. It doesn't mean our day is completely ruined, and then everything was fine after that. So I think it's
yeah.
such an important way to model to our kids apologizing, because similar to you, I don't remember that happening when I was a kid for sure.
Yeah. It's powerful. It's so powerful. And you saying there about, that redo or reset, it's about, and this is embodied parenting, right? This is you or have that awareness, you regulate yourself, you can co-regulate with your children, you model the behavior, so you apologize, and you continue on. You don't get stuck in this shame spiral or guilt or become a victim to. You've got this real empowered version of you, that you can step into who you want to become at any given point. It's never out of your control.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
also, there's that understanding that those blow ups, as you say, it doesn't give you permission slip to just keep blowing up. Like, you've got to hold yourself accountable. You've got
yeah,
to say, okay, this is how I'm going to show up different and really 110% try. But there are, like, I think the best advice I was ever given was you're always going to fail. So have a plan for when you do, not if.
yeah,
Like, there's always going to be a fail because there's always growth. So you're always, going to another level, another height. So there's always going to be slip ups.
yeah,
And it's, oh, God, I've lost my trail of thought there. I'm like, oh, where was I? But oh yeah, it's understanding that those blow ups, they're your nervous system's best attempt at keeping you safe in that moment.
yeah,
And I feel understanding coming from that trauma informed side of things where you're understanding how your wounds were created and how your nervous system is interacting with those wounds and informing each other. And this is why you're having a tricky time with X or why you're blowing up or shutting down and stonewalling with Y. there is a beautiful compassion to that. And you can bring in so much curiosity because you're understanding you're not just being a terrible parent. You're not a terrible mom for doing these. It is your body doing its job.
Yeah.
It's your body trying to keep you alive and safe. And I just think there's such a beautiful side to that.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. That's right. Our our brains, our nervous system, they are they're clever. Even
Uh,
though sometimes we're like, why are you doing this? Um, so, I mean, I'd love to know your experience. So, when you sort of started on this journey, what were some of the, I guess, pivotal moments or key things that supported you into moving into a more embodied state as a parent and going from that rage and that stress and that anxious state into, I guess, your journey of where you are now? What were some of the things that, yeah, you learned along the way that were really pivotal for you?
mm. Do you know, one of the biggest things was realizing, and I don't, this might sound very basic, but it was huge for me, was realizing that I actually did have a choice in every single moment.
Mm,
You know, for example, going to the grocery store was a huge trigger for me. You know, like the thought of going to the grocery store alone would have me on edge. Just waiting for the meltdowns to happen, waiting for the tantrums, like they're running up and down the aisle, trying to control everything, while still getting the groceries, while just trying to get out alive was the key to the grocery store shop.
yeah.
But what I found was in the grocery store, I would be able to manage or control my yelling. Whereas at home, I would say I had no control. I just flipped. I couldn't stop myself. And you know, I actually don't think I've said this to anybody before, but one of the things that I used just mentally when I caught that was I pretended there was CCTV around my house. And I imagined my house to be like Big Brother, just to try and support. I know it's
No,
bizarre,
I'm
but
gonna
just
use that.
because you know, like when you've got that awareness of like, oh, I'm being watched, that was the very first step that took me from going into straight automatic yelling
Mm,
to stopping and pausing and slowing down for a second to then being able to respond.
yeah, yeah,
And that was huge, like huge for me
mm,
because everybody would say stop and breathe, pause, take a moment, like just walk away. I'd walk away and my daughter would get bigger and louder and clingier and physical. And that would only have us both escalating like in a competition to who could blow up the quickest.
yeah.
And right, like
I
I
can relate.
think
Or they follow you, and I'm like, my God, would you just leave me be for a minute?
blowing at the bathroom door and you're on the other side, like,
Yes,
oh,
I know. Yeah, my two are like that.
yeah. And so, in order for me to take control of my behaviors, because I realized that when I became victim to the yelling, there was no stopping it. And when I realized that I could use this little mental tool, then I could actually start implementing that pause. I could implement the breathing. I could implement the conscious choice.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until I took charge of my behavior that I was like, actually, I do have choice in every moment of every day. I just really need to flex that muscle. And for me, it looked like being in the Big Brother house.
It's like, who's watching?
Ah,
But
um,
yeah, but I think, I think that's a good, image because like it's like that accountability.
mhm.
If I'm yelling at my kids and being really harsh, like, do I actually want someone seeing that? And, probably not. um, but yes, I totally relate to the grocery store when I take my two. And I did yesterday. And yeah, for me, it's still a little bit anxiety provoking because
Mm,
they like to run around, but so it's kind of that giving them that little bit of freedom, but also trying to set those boundaries as well and having those boundaries in place.
mhm.
We do a lot.
Yeah.
We do a lot of prep in the car before we get out and do those sorts of things.
Can I ask what kind of prep you do? I'd love
Just talking
to.
about, okay, my eldest, he's not too, he's okay, but they, kids feed off each other, and once one starts, the other wants to start, and which is completely normal. So talking about, like, for my youngest, I usually give him choices like, do you want to sit in the trolley, or are we going to walk? Okay, well, if we're walking, you have to stay at least in the aisle, like you can,
Mm,
and we're going to walk. Not always the case that they walk, but at least so I can see where you are. So just those sorts of things, just trying to mentally
yeah.
prepare them and just give choices, so at least he feels like he's got something, or like, you can help me get this. So giving him things like little jobs to do when we're in the supermarket if he's not wanting to sit in the trolley, or taking something from the car in with him. So whether it's like a little
Mm,
toy or whatever it is. So just little things like that, just to either give him something to do, give him jobs, and just kind of try and set those boundaries of the,
yeah.
what we're going to do when we're in the shopping centre or in the supermarket. So yeah, and then try and encourage his brother. Let's model this behavior to him and get him to try and do these things, but not always. Doesn't always work, because kids are kids. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just some things that I try and do, especially when we go into supermarkets and shopping centres, because it is generally pretty chaotic with my two, because they're both
Yeah.
pretty spicy.
Oh, I love that though. I absolutely love that because you're really promoting that autonomy, aren't you? Like, here is your choice. How do you choose? And something I love is that, you know, the trolley or walking, it's not choose whatever you want. You have that boundary. It's this or this. Now you choose which one. And it really gives them that sense of autonomy, and it really provides them a space where they can feel empowered in making that choice.
Hmm.
And that's gorgeous. Again, like, to give our children the power to make their own choices and not consistently be told, this is what you're doing. This is what I expect. They get to co-create with you.
Yeah, yeah. So it actually worked quite well yesterday. Interestingly, though, there's one of those. I don't know if you have them in New Zealand, but at a lot of shopping centres, there's like phone places where they sell phone cases and lots of different things, and they're
Oh
just kind
yeah.
of set up in the middle of the aisles. And as we were walking out of the supermarket, he ran off, and they hadn't closed their door to go behind their counter, and he just went behind and just started. And the poor lady behind, she's like, "Oh, you can't be behind him. Sorry." He was fine. He came out, like, maybe close the door so kids don't run in, or maybe it's just my child
Yeah.
that likes to run behind counters.
Children are naturally curious.
And he is very curious about everything. He just, yeah, he's just one of those kids. And it's similar to yours. They're both quite wild kids, but both very different. Just when my
Mm,
eldest was his age. And again, he was an only child then, so it was different dynamics as
mm.
well. But he would just push the trolley next to me when we were in the supermarket. I'd pass him things, and my youngest is just like, he's out, he's gone.
He set you up for fail, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
He gave you an unrealistic expectation of how children
Yeah, I'm
behave.
like, oh yeah, he's gonna be like this. I'm like, nope, nope. He's an adventurer and an explorer, and we'll get into everything. So yeah, lots of
Oh,
those preparations that need to be done with my youngest, especially.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I just to add just very briefly onto your stories. My shopping trips look so much different to before, and I feel not to this extreme. Parents, I'm not expecting all parents to jump onto this boat, but I mean, I feel like we can drop the, shall I put this, how concerned we are with how we're seen.
Yes,
Like,
that's huge.
we're so consumed by how others might see us and how we might be judged. And I feel like that is the fuel behind a lot of behaviors because, you'll know our nervous systems read each other.
Yeah.
And so going into that space, worrying about these things happening, worrying about how we're going to be perceived, worrying about how it's all going to unfold, your child is going to deeply feel and sense that.
Yeah.
And their systems are going to go into like, oh gosh, what's happening? Panic.
Yeah.
And so they will start acting up because they can feel that energy.
Yeah.
But like our shopping trips look like doing cartwheels up and down the aisles because my daughter's a cartwheel fanatic.
Mm.
We have races sometimes when things get hectic because I'm like, let's just burn off a little energy and then let's just slow down. So we might like do a little sprint and then I'll bring them to magazine aisle and say, oh, can anyone spot the pink letter or the cow or the whatever, the car? And so it really slows them down and brings them in. Or we do this game, I think is it Black Shoe? Who's in, not you? It's some game they play at school anyway, where you've got all feet in and it's like eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yeah.
And that just really focuses them down and in. And so it can slow things down. But I've had shopping trips recently where they'll be holding onto my ankles. I'm pushing the trolley and I'm like dragging them along the floor. And parents look at me like, you're insane.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we're all having fun. We're
Yeah.
all still connected. It's making the whole trip so much more enjoyable for everybody. Like, yes, I have extra laundry to do at the end of the day, but it's dropping that need to please other people
Yeah.
or to appear a certain way. And it makes life so much easier. As
I
I say, I'm not expecting everyone to jump onto that. I know that could be too far for some people, but
I love that you brought that up because it just reminded me of a couple of things that happened in this same shopping trip yesterday. My eldest, I'd said to him, can you go and get this? And it was a couple of aisles down. So he'd gone off because he's old enough to do that. I said, we'll be in this aisle. And so he'd gone off and then I think I was carrying his brother or he was piggybacking him or something. And he started yelling out his brother's name. And then a passerby, an older gentleman was like, oh, he said it in a joking way, so I appreciate that. But he's like, oh, you're yelling very loud or something, and I just was like, yeah, he is. He's calling out for his brother because it is that judgment from others, and often it is the older generation that we get the
oh,
judgment. No
don't.
offense, but it is what it is, and I'll call it out for what it is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because yeah, my boys are very loud. Like our neighbors must wonder what happens in my house sometimes. um, but I'm just like, you know what? If that's what they need to do, they're not hurting anyone. If it was saying something to
Mm-hmm.
someone, then that would be a different story. But he was just calling out to his brother. So it's funny that you say that because we often will get the eyes and the looks at us
Yeah.
on our shopping trips. And then the second thing, as you were saying about dragging your kids, I was literally doing that yesterday with my youngest. He didn't want to
Yay.
move, and I was like, "Am I going to just pull you?" I had his arms, and I was dragging him down the aisle, not hurting him, but he was laughing, and I was getting all these strange looks. But he just wanted me to drag him down the aisle. So yes, I can totally relate to that.
Oh, I love that I'm not alone in dragging my children around the floor of a shop.
Yeah, yeah. And he wanted me to keep doing it. I'm like, this is actually a workout for me.
But how did you feel getting back into the car, having had that connected, fun experience,
Yeah,
right? And it takes work. Like, by no means is it easy to drop the concern of what other people will say or how they'll think about you. But that was what you needed to do, was like just drop that concern, drop that fear and worry of how people perceive you. And I'm sure it's in alignment with your values, your family values. Like for me, connection is one of my biggest values. And to have that relationship, like deeply connected relationship with my children, like I want them to turn to me no matter what age.
yeah, yeah,
And I can't foster that if I'm always caring about what other people will think of me.
yeah, yeah. That's right.
Mm,
They're not harming anyone, or
no.
damaging anything. Then I think we got to let kids be kids. And I think too
Hmm.
many people, like you said, when you were growing up, it's kids should be seen and not heard. And there's still that
Yeah.
mentality with many, many people. But kids are going to be
Yeah.
mad. They're going to express themselves freely, which is what they do. And unfortunately, at some point, that kind of gets shut down a lot with a lot of kids. And I know probably
Oh,
similar to you for our generation, that's now that everything's coming back out, we're like, oh, that's where that's from. And, you know, our parents were doing the best they could. And,
yes.
you know, that's, we know more now. So, you know, once you know better, you do
Mm-hmm.
better. So it's a constant evolution, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you know, you just said that and it just reminded me so much. I've got this, I say this to parents, and some parents take it well, and some parents are like, oh, that's dumb. But you know, our children, they're they're very egocentric, right? Everything is about them, essentially. It happens to them or because of them. And they're so obsessed and concerned with having their needs met, with being authentically them, with showing up how how they want to. Like they have no filter. They say what they feel, and they know what they love, they know what they don't love. And imagine, you know, this is what rubs people the wrong way. I genuinely believe that our children are these things. We condition it out of them based on how we were raised because we live in this fear of, again, being judged or how our children might turn out because that's the message we received. And so we condition it out of them. But then they hit their 30s and then they're in therapy to try and rebuild that same thing that they already had innately when they
Yeah.
were born. And I just dream of a world where our children get to hold on to that the whole way through.
Yeah.
How much more beautiful. Imagine if we were all a little bit self-obsessed with getting our needs met, not at the sacrifice of others, but just that we held so much importance in ourselves that we were like, hey, actually, I need this. I'm going to go and get that done.
Yeah.
Or, no, I don't like that actually. And I'm not going to pretend I do just to keep you happy.
Yeah.
How much more healthy would we be emotionally and mentally? I just, yeah, I think embracing our children's authenticity. And, you know, I like to say, like you said about those firm boundaries, for me, with the embodied parenting, I imagine myself to be the bumpers on a bowling alley lane. You know, like in a bowling lane, and you've got those bumpers, and the ball can ping backwards and forwards. I'm very much like that. I have my boundaries of this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. You do whatever you want within the space, within reason. You know, like you be you as long as you say, you know, you're not being disrespectful, you're not hurting, and you're not damaging things, you know, you're not being destructive. Otherwise, you be you.
Mm.
And I just feel like to do that, like you're supporting them to become the best version of themselves without trimming away too much individuality.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that analogy actually.
Hmm.
The good old bumpers on the bowling alley.
Keeps everybody safe, right? Like outside of that, you're gone. You too late.
I need the bumpers still. Look, I'm just saying. um, I just wanted to ask you one final question,
Hmm.
and it's really just any practical tips, and you've given a couple already, some that I'm going to start to try and use as well. But any practical techniques or strategies or exercises for any mum who wants to start to cultivate a stronger connection with their children and even with themselves and start to, I guess, move from wherever their starting point is, whether it's the rage, the stress, the anxiety, the overwhelm, more towards that embodied parent.
Hmm. Oh, can I give two?
You sure can.
I don't want to overwhelm, but there's like two that really spring to mind, and I just, yeah. Okay. So the first one reflects back to that Big Brother house. Kind of things I was talking about, that pause. And I feel the more in tune and aware of your bodily sensations in different moments is going to serve you so, so well. And what I mean by that, if you think of, say, for example, you've got the different polyvagal states, but if you want to simplify it right down, green being calm, chill, connected, yellow being you're a little bit activated, a little bit irritated. You've got your orange where you're starting to outwardly, like you're doing the sighing or the hands are starting to, oh, sorry, pound down on things. And then maybe like that red being just before you explode.
Yeah.
Knowing how your body talks to you at each of those will really serve you in catching yourself before you get to that red.
Yeah.
And when I say about like that pause, bringing it back to the big brother is when you start to notice those signals kicking off. For example, my daughter had a big spiral the other day in the car, and I noticed just at the, where your ribs split, just right there in my diaphragm area, I just felt this knot of energy, and my hands started to tighten around the steering wheel. And then that was my warning sign. So I know now that I'm in that yellow orange phase, and I was able to catch myself. And it's really important that when we're in that phase that we don't get stuck in stories. And this is something I mentioned earlier on is, like because she is yelling, because she hit something, it's just I am feeling that ball of energy. I feel like I'm not doing a good enough job at being a parent. I'm worried that they're going to turn out terribly. And it's more I statements
Yeah.
so that you can then start to recognize why or where this activation is coming from.
Yeah.
So dropping into your body, so that pause is not about breathing or anything else. It's about recognizing how your body is talking to you and stepping away from those stories so that you don't get caught up in further activating your nervous system, which will, from my experience, will cause you to go into that red zone of being reactive or shutting down, being disconnected.
Yeah. And can I ask what you did in that moment?
Yes, yeah. So I have a tool called Hagava. So Hagava. Have you heard of it? You possibly have.
I haven't actually. I don't think.
No?
No, I'm curious now.
Okay, so feedback sandwich where you've got like a positive bit of feedback, the kind of constructive bit, and then a bit more positive.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, but in polyvagal terms. So the ha is hum and then active rest. G is growl and then active rest. And then va, so the V is vu and then active rest.
Yeah.
And so it's on either end, you're activating that parasympathetic nervous system. You're really activating the rest and digest part of your nervous system. And in the middle, you're using that fight flight energy.
Yeah.
So for me, I was really going towards that anger, that frustration. So I knew it was more of a fight flight response. So I noticed the feeling in the pit of my stomach. My heart was getting a bit faster. I could feel a bit of a heat rising towards the base of my neck, going towards my face. My hands were getting more white knuckled around the steering wheel. So I just allowed her to keep going because, like she was safe. And I knew that if I was to come into that conversation with her, we'd only rise. So I sat there and I just hum. So you do a hum and then you just stop and track your body. Just notice, has anything shifted? Has anything changed? What else is coming up? Are there any images or stories? Like those, like it's because she's being disrespectful, things like that. And then I go into a growl, and you can either do this out loud or quietly. Now, because I was with my children, I did do it quietly. I didn't go into a full growl in case it scared them because I didn't warn them and they didn't know what was happening. So I just really went into a growl face. And so I'm driving along to oncoming drivers. It must have looked bizarre because I'm like, but I also imagined a lion in full roar
Yeah.
because, as you're aware, your brain doesn't know the difference between perceived and real. So even imagining that lion roaring in a full primal sense will have my brain start to deactivate because it's used that fight flight source of energy.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the active rest. So again, just tuning into my body, going down and into my body, recognizing has anything changed, shifted. I assign my feelings colors. So, has the color changed, the shape or size? And then we go back into that vagus nerve activation where you're saying VOO. So you inhale through your nose and make VOO, the VOO sound out through your mouth. So VOO, and you just keep it low and steady for as long as you can. And so it's really just bringing in some parasympathetic along with using the charge that's in your body.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I do a lot of humming and using my voice to stimulate, yeah, like
Mm,
you said, parasympathetic and the vagus nerve. I'm curious to know with that, if after you do the growl part and you still were feeling quite activated, would you repeat that?
yes.
Yeah.
I also noticed, you just reminded me there actually. I also noticed that I went into not quite progressive muscle relaxation, but I used that squeeze
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
steering wheel. So my whole body was tense and tight. And I
Yeah.
held it for a slow count of 10 and then I released. And so again, that is your body is going to communicate like, hey, we've just run away from that saber-toothed tiger. We're safe now. Whew. And so, because you've used that energy, your body is now going to communicate to your brain and help that survival part of your brain to start dampening down the stress response.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would, and I think that for me is the most missed part of somatic experiencing, especially on social media, is that nuanced side of it of, and there's a lot of information out there saying if you're feeling angry, just thrash, like have an anger party, like whack pillows, scream, yell. But if you do that, so it's quite nuanced, right? Because if you do too much of it, you can actually further activate your nervous system.
Yeah.
And if you're in a shutdown state and you bring in too much, or you weren't allowed to be angry, and now you've got like this overwhelming sense of anger rushing through your body can go into like further into that defense and pull back even further into shutdown or dissociation, depression.
Yeah.
So it's just so important to have that active rest, small amounts of activation like that growl or that squeeze, and then stopping and noticing what's actually happening within your body.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that. I mean, I've heard of all those things in isolation, but not doing it, as you said, like the
Hmm.
compliment sandwich, so to speak.
Yeah.
So yes, another thing I'm going to try, and I kind of do similar, I think, intuitively anyway, and especially in the car because that is often a big place for my kids when they like
Mm,
to let out big emotions in the car. So yeah, I'm like tensing my muscles and relaxing, or like humming to myself and doing those types of things. But that's really great to remember to have that pause afterwards to drop back into the body. So thank you for sharing that.
mm, my pleasure.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Did you have any other last little bits you wanted to share or anything else before we wrap it up?
No, just one other tiny, tiny thing is I think I mentioned it earlier on, but both our and our children's behavior, they typically represent an unmet need.
Yeah.
And so just really starting to understand that if you are consistently shutting down, withdrawing, going for emotional eating, or going into rage cleaning, or verbally raging, or if your child is consistently, quote unquote, acting up, get curious. Like really start becoming curious with what are your unmet needs? What's something that you're not meeting? Do you feel safe? Have you been emotionally attuned to? Is somebody actually seeing and hearing and validating your experience? Are you doing it to yourself? Like, are you getting appreciation or giving appreciation, autonomy? Are you having enough fun? And I think that's a lot of parents fall down on that one, right? Like, we don't tend to have fun. And if that need is unmet, it will come out in a behavior. So I just highly encourage, and I think, the more compassion and curiosity we can bring to our experiences, the better, because the more shame and judgment, that's only going to further dysregulated, it's only going to further perpetuate the behaviors we don't want to see.
Yes. Yeah. So
Mm.
true. Thank you for that. Yeah, so true. Where, if anyone wants to connect with you, where's the best places to find you? And I'll pop all these in the show notes anyway, but if you'd like to verbally tell us.
Thank you. Yes, so my main hangout is on Instagram. So it's at Emma Hopper Coaching. And I do also have a website, emmahoppercoaching.com. I'm like, what is it? Of all the things to forget. But yes, I have that and I usually hang out there and I love having interactions. So if you ever have any questions or you just want to jump in and have a conversation, I welcome it. I love that.
Amazing. Yes. Go check Emma out. And I'm so glad we connected. And yeah, look forward to staying connected and
Yeah.
potentially doing another podcast at some time in the future.
Yes. I'm trying to get a podcast set up, so I'd love to have you and host you on mine as well. That'd be amazing.
Love it. I would love that.
Mm.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And I will speak to you all on next week's episode.